so that anyone who wants to catch up can do so. As soon as it decides to do it. And thank you. All right, so, and hello, Rhoda's joining us here, and we're streaming on YouTube now, which is good. And let me get ourselves. Will I kind of show us in the thing? I don't think it knows how to do that. Yeah, let's do that. That looks better. Okay. And now for those of you who are in the room, let me adjust this so that you can see it. How are we doing? Can we see the text? I can't make it any bolder.
I can see it.
But I can duck my head a little bit. Okay.
You might need to move. That's what happens to Lauren is you can't see.
Sorry about that. So we're talking today about covenant and connection. And this is one of the four lessons that was offered as part of the Global Day of Jewish Learning. So we're going to go through as part of our theme of one people. We are one people united by what? By our covenant with God. And since it's a covenantal relationship, it's something we're all a part of. So naturally, that's how we're talking about covenant. Please come in. That's how we're talking about covenant and connection in this unit. So I can't get rid of this thing. There we go. So in the Torah, the idea of a covenant is used in various places as indicator of God's relationship with and expectations of those included in the covenant. And so we're going to study some text so we can develop insight into the unifying nature of our shared responsibilities as covenantal partners, essentially. And so we're going to look at a couple covenants. We're going to look at Noah and his covenant. We're going to look at Abraham and the covenant with the Jewish people. So part one, we're moving to Noah. And of course, we know that these are, how many of you are aware that these are like separate covenants in a way? How many covenants? Well, we're part of one now, really, but how many of you were aware that these were separate covenants, or how many covenants do you think are, I'm going to use that word too much, and it's going to start to mean nothing, but what do you think?
Well, after Noah, God covenanted not to have floods. That's
Right. So we're getting kind of if not a learning process, then certainly a development process. And of course, the first covenant is with everyone, and they get more narrow from there. Narrowing down to our people, essentially, but it didn't start there. So the first part with Noah, so Noah makes an offering and all that, his family make offerings when they come off the ark, and God responds by making a promise. Although it's not necessarily the same thing. It's not a brit in the way we will later call covenants a brit or a contract. Yeah.
Because Noah doesn't have a part that he has to keep.
That's interesting. It may be because you're right, covenantal relationships are ones in which everyone has responsibilities as well as benefits. And to be fair, he does do a little bit of that, but let's look here at our first text, Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 through 22. They're not going to use our nice gender neutral language, but I'll clean up some of the lords. Noah built an altar unto God and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And God smelled the sweet savor. flavor would be another, the sweet taim, the,
Taste.
yeah, taste or scent or, experience, yeah. And God said in God's heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for humanity's sake, for the imagination of the human heart is evil from their youth. Neither will I again smite any more everything living as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease.
Can I ask a question about that? We're made in God's image, and yet he's looking at us and saying, but evil is in their heart from infancy. Since Adam's sin, is that what's in?
Well, so it's something I think God has picked up on in the not more than a handful generations since Adam and Eve and Noah. What God has noticed is that one of the things you're seeing here really is free will at play. And so God created humanity, knowing their potential, but not knowing what they would choose. Or not being able to impact it. And so it's even if we're talking about a matter of hope on God's part, I would say that it doesn't seem likely based on the story itself that God knew that humans were going to be quite as bad as we turned out to be, that our hearts would follow our evil inclination so much more often than perhaps God thought that we would. That's what makes the idea of this being a disappointment, the whole Noah story being a disappointment with the state of humanity, something that we pay attention to in God. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Sometimes I just try and answer whatever question I hear, and that's not always the question that's asked. So, okay. So we have some questions. So in these verses, God makes a promise, and this goes to Lauren's, what Lauren pointed out, is anything required of humankind in order to fulfill this promise? Yes or no, why or why not? I moved it back up to the text so everybody could see it.
I don't think we are required to do anything. He acknowledges our capacity for evil, and he says, even so, I will not destroy mankind.
That's true. I think a plain reading of the text, it's easy to see that. Does anyone want to argue the counter of that in fact there is something being asked of humanity
We
here?
have to take care of the earth, maybe, while. Earth
Okay.
remains.
That's a possibility. What prompts God's promise?
The sacrifice,
Service to God.
right?
So you might argue, one could potentially argue that because the promise is spurred on by Noah's impromptu free will offering, we'd later call them, that it's one of those instances. I'm reminded of the times of the prophets, in which the prophets would say, repent, turn back. If you turn around, God will forgive you. And this feels like a moment of teshuvah after this calamitous catastrophe that was God wiping out all living things except for whatever was on the ark and various birds, I guess, and fish. Since I doubt a flood would kill any of them. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I would just say there's a chance you could argue that because this sacrifice is what inspired God's promise, maybe that's seeing the good side of humanity. God mentions the bad side of humanity, but God's responding to something which is clearly the good in humanity, the desire to serve God, the desire to do what is right, which we also have within us. And so is this promise a covenant? Why or why not?
there's an exchange of value, so that makes it a contract. Service for,
It's a contract of any kind, right? There's a promise, there's like this is the sign, there's gonna be a sign, we'll see the sign. Sign is the rainbow, right? I'll put this sign in the clouds to remind myself and you that I made this promise. So it's a promise, it's binding.
God.
Binding on God. This is the part where it's a little questionable about its covenantal nature.
There's no quid pro quo.
And there's not there are no responsibilities, it doesn't seem, yet on humanity. Although you could argue, I'm gonna be doing a lot of this today. One might argue that because humanity was commanded from Michatchila, from the beginning, to care for the earth, to take care of the animals, to there were certain things that they were supposed to do, that human beings were originally designed to do. And so you could say that that is still the binding elements of the covenant, of this being covenantal, if you wanted to. I agree. The reading of these verses does not indicate that there's anything there. Okay, so now we're going to get text 2 from the next chapter in Genesis 9, and this is going to get us into more covenantal covenanting. That's not a word. Okay, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, right? Puravu, this isn't the first time we've heard this, right? And that was that was in Genesis 1. So he's once again, he's kind of reiterating some of the things that God is reiterating some of the things that God had said originally to saying, okay, we're starting over. Let me just go over the ground rules again. And as is God's way, God's going to add a couple more rules to God's going to build some fences because clearly there weren't enough fences to keep people from doing the really bad stuff last time. So we're going to build some fences. We're going to keep building fences until we get to Judaism, which is going to be the ultimate fence builder, to keep us from doing the things God really hates, because God doesn't like a lot of things, but there's some things God really hates. And we were like eating living creatures and stuff, just not something God wants you to do. Anyway, and so replenish the earth, and the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every fowl of the air, and upon all wherewith the ground teems. And upon all the fishes of the sea, into your hand are they delivered, right? You can use them. Every moving thing that liveth shall be food for you. As the green herb have I given. I hate this translation that they're using. What does this mean? Obviously, you can eat any of the creatures who are moving around. We're not quite at kashrut yet, right? This is not the Noahide. And again, we call the idea that the Noahide laws in Judaism still technically apply to everyone who isn't Jewish. And so, these laws, there's no kosher here, but we're going to get the rules as far. Remember that in the original rules, we weren't really supposed to eat animals, but people didn't prove capable of doing that. So we're going to change it just to avoid the things God hates most. So only flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. I don't know why it's doing it this way. Don't eat the blood of an animal. Or a living animal, as I said before. And surely your blood of your lives will I require, you'll die. At the hand of every beast will I require it. Beasts also have to follow these rules. They also die if they break them. And at the hand of man, even at the hand of every man's brother, will I require the life of man. So there's now death penalties, and things you're not supposed to do. Don't eat blood. Don't rip a leg off of a goat and literally start eating it while the goat was alive. People used to do really bad stuff, but they shouldn't, is the point. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed, for in the image of God made humans were made. And you, Puravu, swarm in the earth and multiply therein. So that's what they have to do. That's their side of the cut, right? That's the human responsibilities. Human responsibilities. Not that long a list at this point. And then we're gonna go to the next thing. God spoke to Noah and to his sons with him, saying, "As for me, behold, hine, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the fowl, the cattle, and every beast of the earth with you. Of all that go out of the ark, even every beast of the earth. I will establish my covenant with you, neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood, neither shall there be any more. There shall never be a flood to destroy the earth again." I don't know where Lee Mood got these translations, but so okay. So God's gonna do some stuff for us. You can eat meat now, mazel tov, as long as you kill it and drain its blood. You can eat meat. And beasts and stuff are gonna be afraid of you, which is a good deal, because bears are mean. And then there won't be a flood. And I won't wipe out all of humanity ever again. Which again, sounds like a pretty good deal. Yeah. So a little more of this before some questions. God said, "This is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations," right? Forever and ever. L'doratechem. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring clouds over the earth, and the bow is seen in the cloud, that I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, "This is the token of the covenant which I have established between me and all the flesh that is upon the earth." So, just in case we were worried God would forget, you'll see a rainbow, and when you see a rainbow, you know that God remembers that God said God wouldn't destroy the world again. So you don't have to worry that the rain is going to pile up until it floods you, except in, if it does.
But the
Because
covenant
floods
is
still happen.
specific. I won't destroy you by flood.
Yes and no, because God said before that God wouldn't destroy all living creatures at once. So yeah, but God also said as long as the earth stands, that holds. So if God wanted, I guess God could, and then there's no need for all humans to live if the earth doesn't exist anymore. So yes, technically there's an out in the contract. So what does God want from us, and what do we get in exchange in the Noahide covenant? This is how I check learning.
Be fruitful and multiply.
That's definitely one of the things God wants for sure. It was in there a couple times.
That we accept and abide by his laws.
Okay. That we follow these new rules that God is putting on humanity and move forward with that, absolutely. And what do we get in exchange?
We're not wiped out.
Okay. It's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
It's not that much more specific, right? We're not promised we're gonna be as numerous as the sand or whatever, because this contract's with everybody. With every human and all the things that live. This is a very broad covenant. And so it's not that specific if those covenants that are not that specific in forgetting the English language. That aren't that specific also don't grant that many favors. The more specific the requirements, the more generous the benefits generally. We know that too in the world, right? I mean, that's why theoretically why CEOs make millions of dollars, right? Because they're so specialized and what they do is so specific. Theoretically, anyway. So okay, right. it's interesting that the rabbi who wrote this, we can discuss it, says, it seems like God is not expecting much from humanity. I would say, compared to humans today, this rabbi is right. Compared to humans today, this is a very low bar to clear. Saying you should, the Noahide laws in general, things like establishing courts of justice are part of the Noahide laws. That makes a lot of sense, but most of us live in, and we all live in a country where there are courts of justice. So it's, it's not really that hard for people to meet these things. We don't live in a place where people just kill things and eat them in the street. Like it's not something that happens, or where people, God forbid, try and eat things that are still alive. It just doesn't really happen here that much. So it might not seem like asking a lot, but for humans of the time, this would have been a lift. It's important to know that, because we can't just pretend that humans haven't made any progress in the last 4,000 years. That's insanity. But yeah. Interestingly here, it's pointed out that at the very least, there's an expectation that everyone should behave as if they have a shared sense of humanity and belonging in the world, which I do agree with. I think the idea now is humanity at that point was like an aberration. It was a creation without a direction. God was really like, okay, you go live. Don't kill each other, maybe. Other than that, go do stuff. As if that was just going to be enough. Anyone here who's raised a child or has been a teacher or whatever knows that just giving one simple direction at the beginning and saying, go for it, is not the best pedagogy for creating a new species of human, probably. Because children are very bad at it, and humans who never learn are also very bad at it. So, we have to understand that. It says, what are the advantages and disadvantages to such a vague set of responsibilities when considering the message of this first covenant that God makes with humanity? An advantage might be it's not asking a lot, right?
Well, people are on a moral journey, and Judaism sees a moral journey, then this is the baby steps of the moral journey that will eventually.
Sure, but what are the advantages or disadvantages to us, those of us who at one point would have been part of this covenant?
Well, as you pointed out, without some guidelines, we really stray very easily. The advantages of not having too many guidelines is that one can be creative, one can be inventive.
Absolutely. So I would actually say, funnily enough, about this covenant, that's an advantage and disadvantage. That creativity gets us in a lot of trouble, because human beings, what did God say? They just keep devising evil all the time. If only they'd stop with all the evil that they do. And so the more creativity, the more openings, the more loopholes, the more ways humans will find to anger God, necessitating a new covenant and perhaps an example. I don't mean to be a spoiler. But speaking of that, we're moving on to part 2, Abraham. And so, of course, we know Abraham Avinu, Abraham our father. God chooses Abraham and his descendants, creates an additional covenant beyond the one that was established with Noah. I love that. As you explore the nothing, that is just the text. It starts up here, it says, traditional Jewish commentators offer a range of interpretations of this pivotal moment. As you explore nope, just the text. Okay, we're exploring the text. That's what they must have meant. See, without guidelines, we can do whatever we want if they don't give strict guidelines.
Can we backtrack just?
Yes, of course.
Is the covenant with Noah the first covenant, or was there one with Adam as well? You shall not eat of the tree of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would not put that as a covenant. I would say this is really the first major covenant. If only because it's in breach as soon as one of two people eat from it and then it's over. So their covenant, even if it was one, is no longer in effect. Because when it broke, it broke. The Noahide covenant, theoretically, for people who are non-Jewish, is still in effect. So that's a difference. Obviously, we don't do anything about that, and nobody believes it but us. So it's kind of a philosophical point more than a real thing to think about. Okay, we're back to Avram. He's only Avram now. Now we got to remember that he's Avram. Okay, so Genesis 17, 1 through 13. When Avram was 90 years old and 9, he was 99, God appeared to Avram and said to him, I am God Almighty, walk in my ways and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will make you exceedingly numerous. And again, his covenant is a eternal covenant. It says livrit olam, which doesn't mean just covenant, but eternal covenant. It's important to make that note that they don't make themselves in that part of the text. Because later on, Christians will say this covenant is abrogate, is no longer in effect. That it's replaced by Jesus's new covenant. But of course, we don't believe that. We believe this covenant is still in effect and is in fact eternal, can never be broken. If the Christians want to be grafted onto the tree or whatever by their own thing, that's their own business, and it sounds very nice in bringing everyone together. I got no problem with that. But our covenant is still in effect, and it's important not to cut words like olam out of these translations that throw us off. Anyway, Avram threw himself on his face, and God spoke to him further. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and you shall no longer be called Avram, but your name shall be Avram. For I make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile, and make nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you. I will maintain my covenant between me and you and your offspring to come as an everlasting covenant throughout the ages, to be God to you and to your offspring to come. I assign the land you sojourn in to you and your offspring to come, all the land of Canaan as an everlasting holding. I will be their God. God further said to Abraham, as for you, you and your offspring to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. Such shall be the covenant between me and you and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. As for the homeborn slave and the one bought from an outsider who is not of your offspring, they must be circumcised, homeborn and purchased alike. I want to leave this on the screen, but I'll ask you, who is included in this covenant? The Abrahamic covenant.
All Abraham's offspring.
Abraham and his descendants, yes. Kind of.
Yeah.
Who else? Remember, right, people used to be like clans and stuff. Remember that this family, the units we have today are not what we used to have. So the people, his followers and hangers-on are all part of this, even if they're not directly his children. So yes, his servants, slaves, whatever, his nephews, his whatever, so everything is all the people of his household and his descendants will carry this forward, and their followers on will do it, and eventually we'll have a mixed multitude. What promise does God make?
I hate to be talking about
No, you're good.
your offspring will be numerous. There will be many peoples that come from there.
That's the big one. The big one, what does he get? You will be very numerous, multiple nations and kings will come from you. And you who thought you were never gonna have kids will have, unlimited descendants, essentially. That certainly sounds like a good deal. What else?
Land.
There you go. There's the other big piece. The land of Canaan. Hey, hey. That sounds like good. We'll take it. Got it now anyway. So, in any event, yes, we get the land of Canaan in addition. The land he's currently sojourning in, the land, as we know from Lech Lecha, that he was told to go to, is the land that God had always intended to give to the Jews and will be giving to Abraham and his descendants. Of course, when God was planning to give it to the Jews, who knew if he knew who the Jews were going to be at the time? Like which people we'd end up being, but he found Abraham and it worked out to be his descendants. So yes, excellent. So that's, and what does it mean that God says God will be God to us? Right? At the beginning, at the end of the promises part, it says, to be God to you and your offspring to come, I will be their God. Yeah.
Monotheistic.
Okay, so it's certainly establishing monotheism very strongly. The whole part is God is here speaking and God is the only voice speaking. What else?
Put it in your actual Latin. It's not that hard. Susan couldn't even get the real Latin.
What does it mean that God's going to be God to us? Yetziat Mitzrayim, Geulah, the Exodus from Egypt, redemption, all these things that are part of our larger theology. God will guide us. God will protect us. The things that are part of that in general, I think, are what are wrapped up in the promise to be our God, to watch over us. Which again comes up later when we have a need of someone to watch over us and redeem us. What is the physical circumcision about? They want to ask. What is its purpose? You don't have to have lived experience in this. None of us remember it anyway.
Is that a part?
Okay, so to be set apart, but more, turn that around for me. To form an in-group, right? Everyone who shares this particular attribute knows they are part of this in-group, as opposed to everyone else who isn't. Sure, that's certainly part of it.
Sacrifice? I mean.
To show devotion, sure, yeah. I mean, there's certainly, you show devotion by being willing to do this. We know from the Akedah that it was an effort that, that sacrifice related to children is this essentially will take the place of child sacrifice, which was very common, unfortunately, at the time that Judaism was originating.
God has a rainbow to remind him. We have our circumcised state to remind us of.
Okay, so yes, and of course, the other very important part of it is, as God says, it's a reminder of the covenant, so that men who are about to go do something terrible stop and go, hey, wait, I'm supposed to be in a relationship with God. That means I don't do things like this. I don't know how many men are checking before they do those things, but maybe it would help. I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, that's, it says, is it indicative of something more? Obviously, we know it is indicative of more. It's philosophical, it's community connection and in-group, and of course, it's a physical mark that reminds us of the covenant.
Can I go back a second?
Yeah, please.
This is just when it says, what does it mean to be, I will be God to you? In my mind, our word for God, the Adonai, is from the verb to be. And to me, it's a sense of I'm going to be there, not necessarily, I mean, we can interpret it as to watch over you, to be there and take care of you, whatever. But to me, it just means it's that being, we're not alone.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
So you get that from
Just the
calling
fact that it's-
Adonai, like
that
our
it's
Lord, my
referred to
Lord?
be. You know, that the name Adonai, not Adon.
Oh, yeah, okay,
The
you mean Yud Hey
Vav
Vav Hey, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, that's how I.
I was like, I don't know,
no,
I was
no,
like,
no,
right,
no.
Yud Hey
Sure,
Vav Hey,
sure.
yeah.
That's just how, when that question came up, that's what I was seeing, that was a very clear statement that, you know, not saying protect or anything else, but I will be there with you. There is a being.
Hmm.
You're not alone.
Sure, absolutely.
That's
No, I like that. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very true. I think that's part of it is that we have someone on our team. We have a God on our team, which is always a good person thing to have on your team.
better than Adonai, than master.
Well, also I was gonna say Hashem, like is
That's
another
okay.
one that people say a lot. And does that change how I was gonna ask if that changes how you view this, just if you think of God as the name rather than as a lord or ruler. Something a little more ephemeral. Anyway,
No,
It's your turn.
no.
does anyone have anything they want to say about this part?
Just that
Yeah.
the actual physical mark of the covenant also deals with procreation. It's on the phallus.
Sure, yeah, of course. And obviously God is focused on that because if you're gonna have a people that starts off of a family and they're gonna have unlimited descendants, then you might wanna get started on some of the, like it doesn't just magic itself, so. Absolutely. Okay, so later in Genesis, God is gonna outline what makes Abraham deserving of this special thing. Of course, God in chapter 18 says, shall I hide from, and this is of course the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Since Abraham is to become a great and populous nation, and all the nations of the earth are to bless themselves by him. For I have singled him out, and that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of God by doing what is just and right, in order that God may bring about for Abraham what has been promised him. So what does God know about Abraham, which makes him deserve all the blessings that have been promised to him?
That he's both a discerning man and a faithful man.
Yeah, certainly. We know from earlier that God said Abraham was blameless. So what we take from that, another place it also says, quite frankly, that Abraham was Tom, which usually means simple. It can also mean gentle. I take that to also mean sincere, straightforward. Abraham was a very sincere man, and what we see in this, even though it doesn't seem very direct, what it's saying about why Abraham deserves it, what it's saying is Abraham is the kind of guy who will instruct his children and his posterity to keep the rules of God and by doing what is just and right. So in other words, Abraham is a guy God knows will keep the covenant and will teach it. And he just needs a spark. He just needs to start it. Abraham does. God doesn't need Abraham to be, quite frankly, a Muhammad-like figure who conquers half the known world and establishes a religious kingdom before dying. Abraham doesn't have to do any of that. He just has to have some kids and teach them the right thing to do. And God will take care of the rest in order that God may bring about for Abraham, bring about for him. Abraham doesn't bring it about. Bring about for Abraham what has been promised him. So this takes place right before God informs, as I said before, of his plan to destroy the city of Sodom. What can be learned about what God wants from people based on the fact that God doesn't want to hide from Abraham what God is about to do. What does God want from people based on the fact that God doesn't want to hide from Abraham what God is going to do?
Allegiance and trust.
Close, yeah.
That man will think about what's just, what's right.
Yes, also close. God, that humanity will think about that.
And that man will interact with God.
You know what? It's one of the things. I think I have a monopoly on understanding the biggest problems in the world, which I clearly do not. But one of the things I think is the biggest problems in the world is people who lie intentionally. People who say things that are lies and know they're lies when they say them, but they say them anyway. I think God is talking about here. God doesn't want to be duplicitous. God doesn't want to be secretive and hide important plans and by omission lie. Better to keep far from lies. So God says, if I'm in a covenantal relationship with this human, Abraham, can I really keep something like this from Abraham? So that if people say, oh, I heard a God came and destroyed this city, Abraham would be like, I don't know what you're talking about. God's good and would never do something like that. Perhaps. So God's not willing to is not willing to hide this plan. That could be hard because it would have been much easier to just go ahead with it. Not like Abraham could stop God, though he does try to talk him out of it.
Devil's advocate, Rabbi?
Yeah.
God doesn't tell us you're going to get cancer or you're going to die on this day. He
Sure.
doesn't reveal the whole truth to all of us.
Well, yes. But I would argue that that's actually a mercy. I would argue, first of all, human beings can't have the free will God gave them as a gift if they know their end date, because that impacts free will directly. You'll do extra risky things or not do other things because you now know how the end plays out. None of us can know our end, and I think it's a mercy that God doesn't tell us. This wouldn't have been a mercy to deny Abraham this information. It would have been, quite frankly, because God knows he's going to hear it from Abraham, and God would have just been trying to get out of that. Would have just been, I don't need to hear it from this human. What is this human to me that I should listen? And you might think God would think that way. After all, God is God and we're just people. But God doesn't think that way. God's thought is not, well, who cares what humans think? God is very aware that God is setting an example for humans. Seems to me anyway. So what do we learn about the expectations and responsibilities of being Abraham's offspring?
Carry the message.
Yeah, that's one of the things, right? Let everybody know, or not really let everybody know, but do the things, like keep following God's rules and pass it on to your children. So it's not really let everybody know at all, but it is, that. What else do we have to do?
Well, we learn that we can talk to God.
Well, yes, we know we can communicate with God in ways that are not predictable. And importantly, we have to have more children and we have to keep growing and we have to, all of that, we have to grow. So let's see what it says here. Ooh. Abraham's obligations according to the specific language relating to covenant is seemingly only to circumcise his male children. Yeah, I already gave you this lesson, really. There's a lesson here, but I spoke to you about it already. The nature of the enhanced relationship between Abraham and God is highlighted in what we just read in Genesis 18. There, God does not say the reason for Abraham's worthiness for entering into a dialogue. with God is because of Abraham circumcising himself and his children. Rather, it is because of what Abraham does and teaches his children, which we talked about. His ability and willingness to teach his children the right way. Perhaps the covenant of Abraham, the circumcision, is a symbol of Abraham's values emphasized in Genesis 18. Yeah, I mean, his values are what led directly to the covenant, so sure. It's definitely covenantal though, and not values based. He's not like, I am circumcising myself and my son because of values. That never got uttered once. He did it because God wanted him to. This part of the narrative highlights how, because of Abraham, there was a shift in God's relationship with the world. With Noah, God says, between me and the earth, showing no reciprocity because God does not feel that human beings are capable of reciprocity. They're not even capable of doing rules yet. So we're just giving them the bare basics. We're not trying to give them too much to do. But with Abraham, we see God seeking counsel from Abraham. Clearly, God views Abraham as capable of being in a reciprocal relationship, which we talked a little bit about. This scene coming right after the story of Abraham's hospitality with the angels, along with God highlighting Abraham's qualities, which we just read, by the way, in this week's Parsha, Vayera, with the angels. Along with God highlighting Abraham's qualities as someone who guards over the path of God to do tzedakah mishpat, justice and righteousness, shows what links God and Abraham in a reciprocal relationship is Abraham's involvement with and sense of responsibility to others, which was not found in Noah's generation. Circumcision proves that it is not just familial relationships that bind people to the covenant. It's not just blood, in other words, that makes one capable of entering into this covenant. It is a symbol of a connection to the people and their values. Again, this is a very modern text, so we have to say the word values every paragraph, but you could just remove it. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Furthermore, it is not only for familial relations, it is necessary for converts as well. The mitzvah is not only on men, it is both parents' obligation to have it done to their sons. Teaching the parents to teach their children the way of God in the way that God praises Abraham for instructing his children. So both parents have responsibility. It's an interesting twist to say that circumcision isn't just for men, because women have the responsibility of making sure their sons are circumcised. Hey, I'm all for whatever makes people feel like they're included. Although, it's not really quite the same, I don't think. But it's an interesting perspective. Any thoughts on this narrative that they have shared, this teaching they've shared? We don't have questions down here. No, we don't. Okay, the covenant between Abraham and God is somewhat automatic. God will do a lot for Abraham, and Abraham needs to do very little. This relationship is a product of Abraham's nature. Abraham cares for other people. He runs after the angels to give them hospitality. On his side of the deal, his offspring need to circumcise their children, but this is a symbol that will serve to remind and teach them about Abraham and the lesson he passes down to his offspring and students of doing righteousness and justice. They don't have many demands beyond this, nor do they have a choice. God made a deal with Abraham, and that binds his offspring to God no matter what. So it is a deal, and it's covenantal, which means we can't break it, or we shouldn't break it. But it's also binding and eternal, which means it's on us too, not just on Abraham. Does that feel fair? I always like to ask that question and see who's going to be like, no, I hate it. Yeah, I didn't think so. But I'll go a little bit and say, it seems like we try and give our children opportunities to buy in. Confirmation throughout their education. We try and give them opportunities to choose Judaism as much as possible, rather than assuming, right, or rather than that competition that we know about.
it's also a test for every parent. Am I going to do this to my children?
Sure, yeah, it's a test that's why it says the women are also obligated in circumcision, not physically, but to ensure that their sons are circumcised.
I don't know if I'm hearing, I mean, if I've heard this somewhere, but isn't there something in some, is it Muslim communities or whatever, that they do something to women as well?
It's not really specifically Muslims, but there are many cultures that are underdeveloped in which they practice female genital mutilation, in which they attempt female circumcision in a way that is not the same and not, no. We don't have that because there's no appropriate way to do it. Male circumcision does not permanently hurt men. Female genital mutilation definitely permanently hurts women, and girls. So yes, mostly in Africa and some parts of the Middle East, like Pakistan, and Afghanistan, I think now. When we were in Afghanistan, we didn't allow it, but we're not there anymore, so they probably went back to it. In certain places like that, they practice female genital mutilation, but we don't call it, they might call it female circumcision, but we do not, because it's not equivalent. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, we don't have any of that. And I don't think it's specifically tied to Muslims. I think there's a couple of different reasons, although it does happen in parts of the Muslim world. Okay, so part 3, Sinai. So now we get the big covenant that we all still very much are super into today. So okay, they're gonna say, before Sinai, has anything changed since the promise to Abraham? And we're gonna look at Exodus 19 to determine. So God called to him, to Moses, from the mountain, saying, "Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the children of Israel." Moses came and summoned the elders of the people and put before them all that God had commanded him. All those assembled answered as one, saying, Kol asher diber Adonai naaseh v'yashev Moshe. Well, yeah, that's basically that. All that God has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the people's words to God. So, has anything changed since the promise to Abraham?
Reinforcing clause.
What's that?
Well, making it even more specific, to all the people that are gonna follow it, right?
Like we're saying, like, the people will be a treasured possession to me and all that. Yeah, I would say that's somewhat right. A kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We're certainly getting more specifically religious. What we would eventually see as religious imagery, which we didn't really get with Abraham, right? He didn't really talk that much about the worship of God. Mostly the obeying of God was important with Abraham. Now we're getting, there's more to this. You guys are going to be priests, a holy nation. You will still have to obey faithfully and keep the covenant. Obviously a lot has happened, though. What else has happened? Egypt. We're on the other side of Egypt now. So the God who said God would protect us, well, did redeem us from Egypt. But we were in Egypt. We did all that. So a lot has happened. So has there been a shift in what is expected of the people? Yeah. That holy nation bit, that kingdom of priests. We think of priests and being a holy nation as having a higher level of sanctity, therefore doing more to earn that level or title. So clearly there must be more incumbent upon us too. What is this covenant dependent on?
what God reveals at Sinai, the Ten Commandments.
That's true.
Yeah.
That too. More specifically, some of the same stuff that the other last covenant was based on. Obeying God faithfully and keeping the covenant. Sure. And now there's even a little bit here where at the end, the people answer and God brings an answer back. So it sounds like there's an aspect of consent here, right? And the rabbis tie a neat bow on the consent of Judaism by saying all Jewish souls were present at Sinai for the accepting of the covenant. So everyone has actually already agreed to this covenant. You did, you were there. You agreed to it before you got here. Makes it real, ties the bow up nice and neat. It says here, there appears to be a contradiction. The covenant with Abraham includes an unbreakable promise that requires little in terms of specific behaviors. Whereas the covenant described in Exodus 19 states that we will be a treasured nation to God only if they hearken to God's voice and keep the covenant. That's true. There does appear to be a little bit of a difference. Although I would argue that because this covenant turns out to be slightly different, that one covenant can still be fully in effect without this covenant being, even if this covenant were but is not, abrogated. Yeah. This is why rabbis have to be lawyers. Okay. We must conclude that the covenant at Sinai has different implications than that of Abraham. Abraham's covenant was of a familial, fraternal nature. Receiving God's blessing, protection, and gifts, the land, is dependent on the relationship we have with other people, specifically within the family group, but can be extended outwards as well towards servants and whoever. Sinai is a national covenant talking about being a treasured nation to God because of the furthering of the special relationship begun with Abraham. It grows, deepens, etc. The Sinai covenant creates more, or the Mosaic covenant, it's often called for Moses, creates more of a bond between the Jewish nation and God, but this bond is dependent on their choice to keep the Sinai covenant and to actually uphold the terms of the deal. So the bond is even stronger now. Now we're even closely allied, but that has more responsibilities now. And we have to hold to what we agreed to.
Are you saying it's conditional?
Certainly they are saying here that they believe the Sinai, the Mosaic covenant could be conditional. That's what this rabbi believes. I'm not sure I believe the Mosaic covenant is conditional, because it's more complicated than the text they showed us. Because in the Mosaic covenant, there's room for there's essentially a punishment clause, which I think takes the place of a nullification of the contract, which we faced. We were stateless and persecuted for thousands of years. The punishment clause is already in there that says if you don't do this, bad things are going to happen to you and you're going to be enslaved and bad things will happen. And of course, we didn't, and that happened. But I would say it's not conditional, but there's a punishment clause. So if you don't do it, bad things are going to happen to you, even though God said good things are going to happen to you. So that's I think where we change. They included here from the Orthodox rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. Maybe you've heard of him. He wrote The Lonely Man of Faith. Anyway, it's a very fascinating book. So he's going to offer about the covenants of Sinai in Egypt. When we delve into our historical existence, we come to an important realization regarding our Weltanschauung. The Torah relates that I can try and look up this word. I don't know what it means.
Worldview, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Now that, yeah, it is. Yeah. I was like, wait, one is world. The Holy relates, the Torah relates that the Holy One concluded 2 covenants with Israel. One covenant was made in Egypt, and I shall take you unto me for a people, and I will be your God. The second covenant was at Mount Sinai. And Moses took the book of the covenant and he said, behold the blood of the covenant which God made with you in agreement with all these words. The third covenant in the book of Deuteronomy is identical in content and purpose to the Mosaic covenant at Sinai. What is the essence of these two covenants? It appears to me that this question was already answered at the beginning of our essay. Just as Judaism distinguished fate from destiny in the realm of personal individuality, so it also differentiated between these two concepts in the sphere of our national historical existence. The individual is tethered to his nation with bonds of fate and chains of destiny. In accordance with this postulate, one can say that the covenant of Egypt was a covenant of fate, and the covenant of Sinai was one of destiny.
I'm lost.
So, okay.
Destiny, I'm trying to parse
Okay,
that.
part of this is that the problem with when they put these together, they don't remember that not everyone has read the material from which they're quoting. So I think there's a bit that we probably could have used in context that isn't in here. But let's break down what we see and maybe through the questions start, there is a difference between fate and destiny as they relate to the various covenants and our potential. That's not a question. To find unity based on these covenants. It's not a question. Just a statement. But in any event, let me try in with the fate and destiny.
Covenant in Egypt, and I shall take you unto me for a people, and I will be to you a God. I thought that was Sinai too. You will be my chosen people.
Well, no, because it gets even more intense. You'll be a holy nation and a nation of priests. Those words specifically are only used in the first in the Exodus.
And when does he say the other in Egypt? I don't remember.
Later in Exodus in 24. One is Exodus 6 from the Genesis 17 covenant with Abraham. And one is Genesis 17.
I'm
Sorry, 24.
I'm sorry, I'm speaking kind of historically. Was there a time in Egypt when he said this to Moses when we were still slaves? When he said it to us? I understand it.
No, it's he says it to Moses at the bush. And he says, I am to this people, I am the God of these people, and I promised their father Abraham that I would take care of them, etc., and so forth. And I shall take you unto me for a people, and I will be your God. Like I remember the covenant with Abraham, and now I'm back to do what I said I would do and redeem you all from Egypt.
Okay.
And
that's at the beginning.
that's kind of a fulfillment of the first covenant, yeah.
Okay.
And then later, after they've already made good their escape, we get the rest, the part we read before from later in Exodus. Sorry, I'm getting these schmut. Yeah. Soloveitchik is smarter than me, so I'm doing the best I can. It says, did the Hebrews continue to practice circumcision in Egypt? We did get a question. We believe that they did practice circumcision in Egypt. As much as it was possible. And when they made it impossible for them to do so, I'm gonna get this part wrong. I gotta look it up. I think God made a it's cool, it's kosher, you're being persecuted thing, in the same way that later Jews in the time of the Holocaust will be excused from their 8-day circumcision because of events. And they're gonna use this circumcision event to halakhically justify the excuse for for the Holocaust. And say, just like in Egypt, it wasn't required because of times of great trouble, so too, the preservation of life is what's most important. And so giving them identifying marks like that is a bad idea in times when people get sent to camps. But After all, the circumcision is not one of the three things you're supposed to do die rather than transgress. You're allowed to skip it if there's a really, really good reason. A really good reason is not, we just didn't feel like it, or we think it's brutal or whatever. That's not a good reason. That's a bad reason. But there are good reasons occasionally, very, very rarely. And they usually are times of societal collapse that are very bad for the Jews. Like when slavery is imploding in Egypt or when the Nazis are rolling over Europe. It's funny because it asks these questions. How does the covenant of fate relate to the Abrahamic covenant? And while he's talking about a term of art that I don't know, I'm pretty sure. I would say that the Abrahamic covenant was a covenant of fate because God had to pick somebody to start this process of being the example. And so God picked, it was fate that the person who was the best of that generation would be the representative of that covenant. How does covenant of destiny relate to covenant at and after Sinai? I would almost say it has to do with, it's funny because I think of fate and destiny as such interchangeable terms, but I would say it was everything that happened after the covenant, the Mosaic covenant, was predestined in a way. It was destiny. The big marks of it, I mean. After the Exodus, the fact that we would eventually have a king, even though God didn't want one. The fact that we'd be exiled, even though if we'd been good, we might not have had to. All the suffering and all of that. This is all, in a way, could be a destiny that will lead one day, we believe, to the redemption of humanity. So it'll all be for a good purpose. Or so we believe. Okay, and we're not going to journal. But if you want to share a reflection based on this prompt, we can talk about this before we go. Covenants combine people together by defining a shared purpose. As Jews, the Torah provides us with a few different models of finding unity within our tribe, with the Jewish people, and with humanity, by shared values within a broader system. Even if we understand the covenant at Sinai differently from fellow Jews, we are still bound up by the familial covenant of Abraham. Even if we are not tied together with the shared memories, values, and ancestors of the Abrahamic covenant, we are still connected as members of humanity from the covenant of Noah. We're trying to build layers of connection here. The Noah is the first layer, we're all that. The Abraham is, even if we're all Jews, but not halakhic Jews, we're still clearly in that. And then the Mosaic covenant we can argue about is essentially what they're saying. We can argue about who's really upholding the Mosaic covenant and who isn't, but Jews can't tell other Jews they're not in the Abrahamic covenant. And because of circumcision, you can't say, well, if you weren't born to the Reformed converts aren't any good. Well, tough, because this says very clearly that once they got the mark and they went through everything, and they're good, and you don't get to say anything. The degree to which we make the choice to live according to any of these predefined covenants will define the degree of connectedness to others making similar choices that we will feel. So as with most things, you have to buy in to get something out of it. The more you put in, the more you get out, as they say. And if you choose to live according to one of these covenants, you will find great comfort and conformity, quite frankly, within the people who adhere to that covenant. We find it here at our synagogue. Everyone who's a member of the synagogue, I'm pretty darn sure, is a believer in the covenant, in at least our covenantal relationship established by Abraham, in the very least. What do we think?
You touched on something to the end that's always a a very dicey area for me in my own thought, although very clearly I've made my choice and I'm living by it. And that's the Mosaic and the Halakhic covenant, where a part of me says, if this is what God told me to do, how dare I not do it every single inch and iota? But another part of me says, do I really believe that that's what God insists that I do?
Right, and the question is, how are they interpreting what God tells you should do, and how are you interpreting that? Because if they say, well, God told you shouldn't drive a car on Shabbos, I would say, well, God never really said that. Right? I mean, you interpreted that we shouldn't work on Shabbat to mean we shouldn't do the 39 actions that were part of building the temple, and we shouldn't do those on Shabbat, and then you said one of those applies to driving a car. So that's how many fences we're dealing with here. So the question is really a question not of whether we're following Mosaic law first. The first question has to be, how are we interpreting work on Shabbat before we determine that? I think there's a very good, though certainly not traditional, interpretation that fits, that says work means work. And you get to determine what that word means. And literally, since the word, and you can't say, oh, well, it shares a root or this, because it shares a root with worship too, and we get to do that on Shabbat. Nobody says, oh, no praying on Shabbat, Rabbi, it's Oved, you're working now. Come on, it's avodah, really? Is it labor? I don't think so. Worship, which is also avodah. My point being, we have to argue about the interpretation. I'm not willing to cede that I'm not doing what God wants by driving a car on Shabbat. I refuse to cede that to them. My interpretation is different. And I have more followers on Twitter than they do, so. No, that obviously doesn't matter, but they don't get to make that determination for me. I get to interpret that. And I know that because Deuteronomy, God did tell me that. So I don't need to, they will obviously believe what they believe. That's fine. But we get to believe what we believe, and that's fine too. Now, obviously you know me, there are lines with that. We can't just say, well, the Torah said something about an egg somewhere, so I guess we have to eat eggs every day. That's a dumb interpretation. No one should do that. I mean, you can eat eggs every day. They're fine, I guess. Watch out for the ones that give you cholesterol. But the rest of it, you can't just make up anything. There are rules, but I think there are perfectly good interpretations from the Peshat that, do the Orthodox try to tie everything into a neat little bow? Sure they do. Do they always succeed? No. Does it bother them? Never. Not once has it ever bothered them that they don't tie all their bows into nice knots. I don't see why it should bother us. Anyway, one people. What? No, what word?
What, when you were saying that, just because the word comes from such and such,
Oh,
What word?
the roots.
Oh, no, but I figured you would know what I was talking about.
I just didn't want to take it personally.
No, there are 4 people in this room. I have to shift my sight to
Letter roots.
Ein Vet Dalet. It's great. But there's only 4 people in the room. I gotta turn my eyes. The odds that I'm looking at any one of you at any given time is 25%. So
This.
no, Diana was online and Rhoda was online before.
Okay.
And maybe let me see. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing and just see. Okay, yeah, they're both. Hey, Diana and Rhoda, thank you for joining us. We're gonna wrap up now, so I'm gonna end this, so we'll be done streaming, but thank you all for joining us. It's always a pleasure to participate in the